I named this video the rebar scandal, why Venezuela's buildings pancake in just a second. They really did pancake. And what was so weird is so many buildings did all fall in the same way. So of course, people started looking for a reason right away, and I have already reported about this video here where rescuers were looking at concrete looking columns, and then they could scrap away that porous material that looked like styrofoam. And then people were wondering, well, if that were the columns that these towers were built on, no wonder they collapsed like nothing. Other voices said, well, if that were the only columns, they would have collapsed years ago. But now something has come up now that we see more images of the rubble and of towers that are still standing, like this one here. You see the column is exposed and the column is also breaking. So now we see there's rebar, the one that is still standing. And the interesting part that is now, and let's talk about the whole picture. I mean, northern Venezuela is dealing with a catastrophic humanitarian disaster right now after this rare doublet earthquake consisting of a magnitude 7.2 followed by a massive 7.5. All that within 39 seconds. That has decimated entire residential neighborhoods. Latest official data confirms people lost 1,700, over 5,000 injured, and 60,000, over 60,000 people still missing beneath the ruins. But as internal search and rescue teams are digging through the dust, structural engineers have noticed like a dark recurring pattern in the wreckages. Hundreds of multi-story apartment buildings didn't just crack or lean, they pancaked. Really, one floor on top of the other and boof. And you can see the images where they're layered, floor by floor. This is what it's called pancaking. They collapsed vertically into flat sheets of concrete. This is what we see, crushing everything and unfortunately everyone inside within seconds. So the emerging structural forensic evidence right now points directly to a widespread engineering failure. And what is that? It is a critical lack of rebar in the columns. Rebar, these are steel posts, smaller, thinner steel posts that you use when you pour concrete foundations, concrete load-bearing columns, and everything that is load-bearing. But you should see these rebars in the rubble when the buildings come down. So they say this is a widespread engineering failure. So what that mean? They say there is a critical lack of rebar in columns. Basically, they also see substandard building materials were used, and in addition to that, decades of ignored building codes. So why did these structures fail so catastrophically compared to earthquake zones in Chile or Mexico? I've reported about this in the past because all these countries had warnings and should have known better because they all had catastrophic earthquakes before. Venezuela in the 60s were buildings pancaked. Same in Mexico. Mexico City in its last earthquake didn't have so many buildings pancake anymore. So to understand now why hundreds, we're talking like 800 plus of these towers, of these modern buildings vanished in seconds, you have to look, of course, at the violent nature of this double earthquake and the ground that they were built on. Yes, all that, and I'm telling you about that, but what they find in the structures is equally as important. Wednesday evening, the Caribbean plate, a building experiences massive lateral forces in an earthquake. The ground shoves the base of the building in one way, while inertia pulls the top of the building in the opposite way than what's going on down there. So Imagine this places a massive bending stress directly on the vertical concrete support of columns on the bottom floors. And in many videos that we are receiving from Venezuela, we see that this is exactly what is happening to the buildings before they collapse. And you've seen the video of the guy running down the stairs. I'm showing it to you in the background again. He started on top of the building, trying to get out of the building. You look at the staircase and you think, yeah, that building seems to be quite intact. The further down he comes, well, you see what's happening. The worse it gets. It really gets bad. You'd think, phew, does this thing still have something to stand on? So the vertical concrete support columns of the bottom floors, they get the most heat. And we know concrete is an incredible material when it comes to compression. It can support millions of pounds of vertical weight pushing down on it. But concrete has one fatal flaw. It has basically zero tensile strength. So what does that mean? When you bend it, twist it, or pull it sideways, it cracks and it shatters like glass. But there is one way to fix this flaw. Engineers use rebar, that is thick, ribbed steel reinforcement bars embedded deep inside the concrete, and the steel basically acts like the building's flexible skeleton. So when the ground now shakes horizontally, the steel stretches and bends, basically absorbing the lateral energy and preventing the brittle concrete from basically exploding outwards. But in the ruins that we have here of La Guaira and Caracas, investigators are finding concrete columns that were virtually hollow of steel. This is what the reports are saying. We do have some forensic engineering reports. They're indicating a vast majority of the collapsed buildings were constructed using what is known as non-ductile concrete. This means the concrete was mixed poorly, often using too much sand, cheaper material, or water to save money. That results, unfortunately, in highly brittle material. But worse yet, the internal reinforcement, what they say was allegedly criminally insufficient. Let that sink in. All the images that you see there, and I mean with over 60,000 people still missing, this gives me shivers down my spine. It's like unbelievable. So we have to understand, to survive a major seismic event, a concrete column requires two types of steel. The longitudinal rebar that is running vertically up the column to handle the bending, but then also the lateral ties. So if you pour concrete, if you pour a foundation, you have the hole for the foundation, you have a box around it like a wood frame or something, then you put a grid of steel bar in there that are already connected like the rebars, and then you pour the concrete over it. You need all that, the longitudinal rebar and the lateral ties, like smaller steel hoops that are wrapped tightly around the vertical bars to keep them from buckling outwards under intense pressure. In many of these pancaked structures that we see, the vertical rebar was there, but too thin. That saves material. And the lateral ties were spaced far too wide apart. So without closely spaced ties, the moment a column bends, the internal vertical steel bars, they're bowing outwards, losing all structural integrity. So this structural negligence that they report has turned hundreds of apartment blocks into ticking time bombs, and the doublet earthquake sequence was the ultimate cruel test. These are the reports that I am reading right now. So now we have 2 strong earthquakes within 39 seconds, which makes it a lot worse. When the first 7.2 magnitude quake struck, these poorly reinforced columns suffered massive internal fracturing. So the brittle concrete cracked severely, shedding its outer layers and leaving the thin, unsupported internal steel to bear the entire weight of the building. The buildings were already then severely compromised, but many were still standing after the first one. But then only 39 seconds later came the fatal second push, a 7.5, even so much stronger than the 7.2. Before the dust of the 7.2 could even settle, the secondary fault ruptured, unleashing this even larger earthquake. So those already damaged rebar deficient columns were hit with a second wave of violent horizontal shaking. So with the concrete already shattered and lacking the necessary steel cages to hold the cores together, the columns, they completely exploded under the immense vertical weight of the upper floors. So without vertical support, gravity kicks in, takes over instantly. The top floors plummeted straight down onto the floors below, basically initiating a chain reaction collapse that pancaked 20-story, 11-story apartment blocks into piles of rubble in less than a few seconds. That is what's so shocking. So the rubble that remains is less than 2 stories high. Imagine that, a 20-story building, now less than 2 stories high. And these rescue teams, they're risking their lives going into these hollow spaces with the rubble above them. One aftershock the wrong way and it can collapse on top of them. So kudos to them, they're heroes. So this disaster has reignited a fierce international debate over building code enforcement, because codes were there in seismic zones. Like countries like Chile and Mexico, they experience massive magnitude 8+ earthquakes with significantly lower structural collapse right now because their laws mandate rigorous steel reinforcement and also independent engineering inspections. Japan, they're the best in that anyways. But in contrast, here in Venezuela, years of economic crisis, unpermitted vertical building additions, and lack of oversight allowed substandard construction to proliferate across northern Venezuela. The US is deploying specialized urban search and rescue teams, and they have also given $150 million assistance to fund and to bolster recovery efforts. The focus, unfortunately, since the 72 rescue window has closed, is slowly shifting from immediate rescue to long-term accountability for that. Millions of people across Latin America are living in structures built with the exact same non-ductile concrete and the missing rebar. So the tragedy in Venezuela right now has uncovered that, and it proves that it's not the earthquakes that end the people. Collapsing buildings do. The 1,000-year stress maximum on faults worldwide, especially in California, which I had just reported about. You should check out that earthquake because there was an earthquake in the Gulf of California, and that has implications on what they found about the San Andreas fault. The stress is as high as it's never been in 1,000 years. So that means the clock is ticking for other vulnerable cities in California as well, but also Cascadia Fault, Oregon, Portland, Vancouver, British Columbia, Victoria, BC, and in many other cities. So the question is, will governments enforce the steel codes before the next punch or even double punch hits? I will keep you updated. Now check out this video here in the end screen. This is insane. You have to see this. I see you there in a second. Thanks for watching.